Megann Marcellino, and I want to welcome you back to Generations at the Table. Thank you so much for joining me today. As always, I'm really glad that you've pulled up a seat. You know, part of the reason that we named the podcast Generations at the Table, what was in my heart was how much I've learned at sitting around the table with my family or leadership or friends. I feel like we absorb so much in those casual conversations that sometimes happen around the dinner table or the lunch table. I've been blessed to hear some amazing speakers from platforms, but what has been really sown into my life as seed that I think has developed fruit is so much of what has just been the casual, the conversations, the life lived together. So today I want to talk to you about generational legacy and generational lessons. We talk a lot in the church about generational curses, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with that concept, but it's the idea that sometimes you see curses and negative things that are passed down through generations. Maybe it's everyone in my family gets divorced, or this family you constantly see sickness and cancer, premature death, things like that. There are things that like literally trail, and you'll find them in family lines. And there's a way to get free from that. There is definitely a way to, be the generation that stops that curse, that begins to walk in blessings. But maybe we don't talk enough about generational lessons and generational legacy and the positive attributes that we can, carry down through our family line. This really came to me. I was standing at the lake the other day with our boys. We have a 4-year-old Joseph and a newly 2-year-old named Matthew, and they were throwing rocks in the lake. And I was looking at the water, and I was just taken back to my childhood, which at the time, my family, my grandparents, my mom's parents lived on Lake McAllister. And this was not a fancy lake. It had like gross brown water, and it was just like one of those things. But I loved being at the lake with my family. I loved being with my grandparents. I so looked forward to summers there. I looked forward to the fishing and the jet skis and the boat rides. And now as an adult, you probably would not be able to make me get in that water. But at the time as a kid, it was like the best memories. And I was hoping that my boys will look back at the lake and have those same memories. And someday when they're raising their families, they'll think about throwing rocks in the lake with mom or going fishing with their dad or what that was like. But those are generational lessons and blessings that we can look back on. And it made me start to think about my grandparents. And they're all gone now, but some of the lessons that they've learned and some of the positive things that they imparted into me. Exodus 12:14 says this, "So this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance." And so it introduces this concept that feasts and the things of the Lord are to be kept throughout generations. It's generational legacy. It's passed on. And so much, or so many of the times at the feast, we sit and we recount the faithfulness of the Lord to the Israelites. And it brings back these memories of God's faithfulness. And so today I want to tell you about some memories I have about my family that I see the faithfulness of the Lord demonstrated. And the goal in this is to not talk about me or my life or what we've been through, but to encourage you to take those moments to pause, because I can't tell you how long it's been since I've just thought about, hey, these are some lessons that they gave to me. Life is so full and busy, and we're in such a family season right now that I don't often think about necessarily the lessons or the positive things that my grandparents left into my life, that they imparted to me. And I want you to take that moment and think about your family. And maybe you didn't have the best family stories. Maybe you didn't have present grandparents. But I want to believe that there was probably someone in your life, someone who engaged with you, sowed into you. Maybe it was a teacher, a mentor, a neighbor, an aunt, an uncle. Maybe it was just someone that you knew from a season in your life. But I hope that they gave you something that you look back on and you think, hey, that was a really sweet time and a sweet memory, and here's some lessons that I can take from it. Psalms 145:4 says, "One generation shall commend your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts." And to commend, biblically, it means to commit or to entrust something to someone, to praise or speak favorably. So the generations before us have given us something to hold on to entrust. And the good, the bad, the ugly, you're holding your family's legacy within you. And it is something that we carry on the inside of us as vessels. And so what does that legacy look like? I hope that after this podcast today or through it, you will think about that grandparent, that aunt, that uncle, that parent that left something inside of you. So what lessons have you been entrusted with? And then what lessons are you passing on to the next generation? And are you choosing to embrace those positive attributes? So in true, full transparency, when my grandmother, who is on my mom's side, my maternal side, Jeannie B, she was such a strong woman. And she had we had a really beautiful relationship during my childhood. But when she got older and was towards the end of her life, she kind of became a little bit mean. And some of the things that I didn't know about her came out. And for a while, when I thought about her in that way. And it was really painful. And I had to ask the Lord to take that from me. And I said, please take away these final years of memories that were negative and allow me to remember the positive, loving, present grandmother who I had for most of my life. Don't let this end where she was suffering and all these things were happening and the medication and everything. It wasn't truly her, even though I realize that sometimes that filter is gone and sometimes what's inside of us begins to show, but it wasn't really her heart towards me or towards my mom or towards our family. So I asked to remember her in a way that was really truly positive, because I have so many more good memories that outweigh any negative. And so then I began to think what am I leaving for my kids? What kind of legacy am I leaving? What kind of memories? When I think about my parents and the legacy that they've left, I think about words like consistency. I think about perseverance and faith and holiness. I think about a willingness to change. My parents have demonstrated to me that growth is a willingness to change. Not only your habits and your patterns, but your mindset. That we don't meet everything and say everything is totally black and white. That we receive some things and say, I can change my opinion on this. I can change how I feel about this. I can admit that I was wrong. I can embrace a new train of thought. Those are the lessons that my parents have taught us. They have demonstrated with their life consistency. And one of the things I am most grateful for from a child who has a family in the public eye and in ministry is that they are the same people at home that they are on the platform. And I think that that's where so many people, in a religious circle, the kids go astray, is because their parents actually live one life in the public eye, but a different life at home. And they have this compartmentalized, and they've segregated and segmented their life. I was really blessed that that's not how it was for me. My parents actually truly practiced what they preached, and they tried to build their life on what they taught. And so that gave it a realness and an authenticity that was it was desirable for me. I am a person who really values authenticity. I really dislike anything that's fake. I like the real, the truth, the raw. Even if it's not good, just tell me the not good, but don't try and sugarcoat it. I try and see through that. I think that discernment allows that. But those are the things that I think of when I think about my parents. Proverbs 6:20 and 21 says this: "My son, obey your father's godly instruction and follow your mother's life-giving teaching. Fill your heart with their advice and let your life be shaped by what they have taught you." And I'm blessed to be able to say that I can fully embrace that scripture with my family, but I recognize that maybe your family didn't leave quite the same legacy, but who in your life has? Maybe it is a spiritual leader. Maybe it's someone that you follow. But how can you embrace those lessons? I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is allowing the lessons to pass us by. When we see something and we don't take anything from it, we just simply observe it. And we act like we're just kind of like a passenger on a train of our own life, not at all in control of our destination, not in control of our choices. How can we take these valuable life lessons, these lessons that the generations before us paid dearly for, learn from them, apply them, and glean from them? I've been reading the Proverbs lately, and so much of it is here's the lesson, live your life by it. Here's the lesson, make your choices by it. Here's the lesson. If you want this, then this is what you will do. And I think so many times we act like and live like victims of our circumstance. And we live in a constant state of response and reaction instead of living on purpose and with intent. And so today I want to challenge you that those generational lessons that you have learned from whether it's your parents or grandparents or just someone in your life, that there is value in there, but the true value comes when you take the lessons that they truly lived and paid for, apply them and live by them. So I mentioned my grandmother, Jeannie B, and I'll give you a little brief introduction to her, but she grew up in a serious poverty situation in Oklahoma. Her family did not even have like interior plumbing until my mom was older and in the picture. So it was very much an impoverished situation. She left early, she married my grandfather, and they decided to start businesses. And she became a business owner and a business leader, and truly a woman with a lot of like wisdom. And not every choice she made was wise, for sure. She made a lot of mistakes, but I think about her and the legacy that she left me, and I think about how she lived a life of what it meant to be truly like an empowered, strong woman and to come up out of her circumstances and live a life better than the generations had left her. That she really escaped that and she became something and created something. At the very end, she and my grandfather owned a bail bonds business. And so she carried a gun and she dealt with people who were getting in and out of jail. Kind of the worst of the worst. But when I think of Jeannie B, I think of strength. And I think one of the most grateful lessons I am grateful for that came through her was truly that women can be strong. And sometimes people ask me about being women in leadership, and I don't really feel like super qualified to talk about it because my family they didn't have a lot of like inequality in that way. They really believe that if you're called to do something, then you're called to do something. And I think that part of that came through like that strong presence that she gave us, that you didn't mess with Jeannie B. Like you just did not. And we just loved her for who she was, but she was operated in such strength. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful that my mom was raised by a mom who was strong. I'm grateful that my dad came into the picture, just at 19, and she really mothered him because he lost his mother in his early 20s. And I feel like because of that, they've demonstrated to me that you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you, whether you're male or you're female. And I am grateful for the legacy that she left me, that I can come up out of a circumstance that I don't want and I can build something better. And as a woman, I can be a business owner and I can be an entrepreneur and I can switch it up and I can change, but that I can live and exist and build that life that I want. When I think about my grandfather, her husband, Vernon B., I think about a man of faithfulness and a man of kindness and a really good person. And what strikes me about him is that he did not come to know the Lord until he was much older in life, in his 80s. But he was always a good man. And he always tried to be a present father. And did he make mistakes? Absolutely. But I felt like he loved my mom and my grandmother well. And I'm so grateful for that example of a man who loved well. And he was faithful. And he worked till he was much older, and he retired even after Paul and I had gotten married. And I'm grateful for that example because I felt like he lived on purpose, like he needed to get up and go to work. And it was good for him. After he retired, I felt like there was something in him that just kind of died. And I hate that. And it's actually one of the things that I am, early retirement, maybe that's for you, but I felt like he lost purpose in that moment. And it was so good to see him happy and fulfilled and doing something that mattered. He enjoyed providing for his family. And when I think about him, I think about sometimes probably one of the first and last really meaningful, heartfelt conversations that he had with me. I had mentioned that my grandmother went through some challenges at the very end. And she had just become, she was just struggling. She was uncomfortable and she was in pain. But he pulled me to the side one day and he said, I want you to know how much your grandmother loves you. And he was trying to correct what he saw becoming this hurt and this wedge in our relationship. And in that moment, I saw a man who was more concerned about my perception of her than his relationship with her, because we were all going through the same thing with her. But he didn't care. He had made peace with that she was who she was, but he loved her anyway. And I'm so grateful for that example. And I'm so grateful that he pulled me aside and said, hey, I want you to know this about her. I think that sometimes, we can play that role in people's lives, and we can say, hey, I want you to be able to see through this moment and see through the heart of the matter. And my grandfather and I never really had a lot of heart to hearts. That wasn't our relationship. But in that moment, he gave that to me, and he showed me the gift of kind of being that bridge sometimes when there might be tension in a relationship. How can I bring clarity? Regardless of how he was feeling in that moment. I mean, those were final days. He was going through his own loss, but that he saw me and saw her and wanted there to be peace in that moment. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for that example he left me. When I think about my father's adoptive family, I think about words that come to mind are strength and perseverance and thinking outside the box and just love. They adopted my dad when he was 6 months old, and many of you have heard this story, but the nuns told Rita, his adoptive mom, that this was a bad baby because he cried all the time. And it turned out that he was colicky. He was allergic to cow's milk. And so he was screaming unattended in this Catholic orphanage. And she said, that's the one I want. And she took him and she loved him. And I think that Rita had a really special bond with my dad. I think that there was a lot of love and favor there. And I'm so grateful for the determination that I saw in her. She was trained to be an Olympic swimmer, and she didn't get to swim in the Olympics for some various reasons with her family, which you look back on, you're like, man, that seems really unfair. But I'm so grateful that she also demonstrated to my dad and to me that women can and should excel in these areas wherever you're called to be. And I'm grateful for Ray, her husband, for saying yes, for being a supportive husband. He was the kind of dad that showed up, and he was consistent. And he wasn't like that, big dreamer, visionary. I'm married to one who's a huge dreamer, big visionary, always on to bigger and better things. That wasn't Ray. But he demonstrated what it was to be steady and to go to work and to come home and to be present and to provide for your family. And I'm so grateful for that lesson. My dad will tell the story that his dad never told him that he loved him. And that hurts me. But I can say Pepe also never said those words to me, but he showed it in his own way. And he came from a really hard childhood in a really hard place, but he tried to demonstrate love. And my dad demonstrates love and affection to me now and to to his grandchildren. And so just because it wasn't modeled to you in a way that maybe was healthy, you can come up out of that. And because I think ultimately he demonstrated love in his own way, although maybe not the way that we would want to receive it, maybe not in our love language, not verbally, not affectionately, but just by being there, I think he taught us to love in our own way. So maybe you have that in your family line where you've got that person that just, they're not meeting that needs, they're not filling that bucket. But how did they fill that bucket from their own place of brokenness? How did they? There were reasons he was the way that he was, and there were reasons that hurt was there. But he still was a good man, and he still was a good father, and he provided and loved for us in different ways. When I think about my dad's biological family, I think about how time can be healed. So my dad, he was reunited with his biological father. We never knew his mother, but he was reunited with his biological father when I was 9 years old. And my Grandpa Joe became a very important part of our life. And he passed not long after Paul and I were married. So maybe he was in my life for, I don't know, even 15 years. That might be a stretch. I don't have to count the years. But the point is, he was in my life for a very short window, but he made a tremendous impact. And he filled a void and brought identity and purpose and love. And he was the opposite end of the spectrum. He was the visionary. He was super affectionate. He told us all the time how much he loved us and how proud he was of us. He was really the opposite. And what I loved about getting to know him was I felt like I got to know myself in some ways, because it was like, oh, that is where this comes from. And if you saw him with my dad, they walk exactly the same. They have this very identifiable walk. And now my Joseph, who was named after him, he also has that walk. And it's so sweet because if you think about what could have been a pain point, like you gave up your son for adoption, but many of you know, my dad, Kurt Landry, was named Joseph at birth, and he was the third. And when he was adopted, they changed his name. And I had always told Paul, if we have a little boy, I would like to name him Joseph. I would like to bring that back to the family, that call. And he was kind enough to allow me to do that with our firstborn son. But part of that happened because he also loved my Grandpa Joe. And he had such a great relationship with him for the few years that we were able to have him in our life as a married couple. And Grandpa Joe poured into him as well. But I just want to remind you that maybe you have a void in your life. Maybe you have an absent family member, but just because it's a short time, it doesn't mean that you can't have a lasting impact. I think about Grandpa Joe with a tremendous amount of gratitude and a tremendous amount of love for everything he sowed into our life for the short window that he was there, for the gift of the name Joseph, for the gift of so much. I could go into more. Did he make all the right choices? No. Was he a little bit of a wild man? Yes. But he was a great grandfather to me for the years that I had him. So if you only have a small window to invest into a relationship, don't discount the ability for you to have an impact and for them to have an impact on you. And it's not too late. My dad would have been, I guess, in his late 30s, early 40s when he was reunited. I can't remember all the years, but tremendous positive impact being reunited with his biological father had. And I just want to encourage you that it's not too late. Don't always think that it's too late, that you can't have that. I hope that today, by sharing some of these lessons that I've learned from the generations that have come before us, my concern was that you would hear these stories and say, well, I don't have a present family, or my family was abusive, or I lived in tremendous lack, or any of those things. I can't look back and think of one good thing. I hope that that's not the case. If that is the case, I hope that you find someone in your life that you can learn generational lessons from, that you can carry those within you. If it is not the case, you can be that generation shifter. You can be the one that changes the narrative for your family. My family did that. My family was the first generation. My parents were the first generation to get saved. Paul's family, first generations to get saved. So we know what it's like to live with those that literally shape our family for the next season. And now we're carrying it out, and their grandchildren are carrying it out. But if what was modeled to you was totally negative and you say, I have absolutely no lessons, then be the one that changes that. But I want to venture to guess there was at least one person in your life. Again, maybe it was a teacher, a neighbor, a friend's parents, a girlfriend or boyfriend's parents, someone who spoke into your life, who gave you a lesson. And the thing that I think that is beautiful about it is that God sees you and God knows you, and he knew what lessons needed to be imparted to you. So grasp hold of those lessons deeply and then begin to live them and apply them and be the one that brings that change into your family, that you would model that. So when my kids look back, I believe that they are going to have even a healthier viewpoint of their grandparents and their parents than we had. And then their children the same. That each generation would improve upon itself, and that each generation would begin to carry those valuable lessons. And like the Israelites, that we would sit down and we would recount the faithfulness of God. And don't let those lessons just go by. What a waste that would be. Embrace them, live them, and become them. Because inside of you, there is greatness and there is a gift that has been deposited to truly change generations. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to being with you again next week.